The humble janitor. Maya was just a janitor. She worked quietly in the big office building, sweeping floors and cleaning bathrooms. Every day, she arrived before anyone else and left after the last person had gone home. She never complained, even when the work was tough. Maya liked being alone. It was peaceful, and no one bothered her. She didn't mind her job, but she also dreamed of something better. The office building was full of important people, business owners, managers, and CEOs. They all walked around in fancy suits and talked loudly on their phones. But Maya didn't care much about them. She was just here to do her job and go home. She had learned to keep her head down and stay out of everyone's way. Maya wasn't like most people in the building. She didn't wear expensive clothes or carry a fancy handbag. She wore a simple uniform and carried a mop. Her hair was tied up in a tight bun, and she wore no makeup. She looked like she belonged to a different world. A world far away from the shiny offices and busy workers who walked past her every day. One morning, as she was cleaning the lobby, Maya heard the sound of loud footsteps approaching. She looked up and saw a man in a sleek suit walking toward her. He had sharp features, and his face was serious. This was Richard Steele, the CEO of the company. He walked with confidence, and everyone seemed to step aside as he passed. Maya had heard a lot about him. He was a rich, powerful man who owned the company and controlled everything that happened in the building. Richard never paid attention to Maya. He never looked at her, never said hello. He was too busy with his own thoughts and meetings. But that day, something was different. As he walked past Maya, he stopped suddenly. He turned and looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. Maya froze, unsure of what was happening. Richard Steele was standing right in front of her. His sharp eyes were scanning her from head to toe. "Hey, do you ever clean these floors properly?" he asked, his voice cold. He sounded angry, even though Maya was doing the best she could. Maya didn't answer him at first. She didn't want to say anything that might make the situation worse. She simply nodded, trying to stay calm. "I guess I can't expect much from someone like you," Richard added, his words sharp and cruel. "You just sweep the floors and pick up trash. Don't you ever want to do something better with your life?" Maya felt a rush of heat in her chest. She had heard people speak to her like this before, but coming from Richard Steele, it felt different. He was the boss, the man everyone respected and feared. But she was just a janitor, someone who didn't matter in this building. She didn't say anything, but the words hurt. Richard turned away, continuing his walk toward the elevators without another glance. Maya stood there, watching him leave. She wanted to shout at him, tell him that she worked hard, that she had dreams too, but she didn't. Instead, she just stood there, gripping her mop tightly. That afternoon, Maya sat in the break room during her lunch break. She had a small sandwich and a bottle of water. She sat alone, as usual. The other employees in the break room were too busy talking and laughing with each other. No one ever noticed her. Maya didn't mind. She liked it that way. But today, after Richard's harsh words, things felt different. She couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. It wasn't the first time someone had treated her like she didn't matter. But Richard was different. He had the power to change her life with just a word. He could fire her, or promote her, or even ignore her forever. He had the control. Maya didn't want to think about it too much. She knew she had to keep working hard. She couldn't let anyone like Richard change her. But deep down, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen if someone saw her for who she really was. What if Richard, or someone else, recognized that she was more than just a janitor? That evening, as she finished her shift and gathered her cleaning supplies, Maya noticed a small group of people gathered near the entrance. They were laughing and chatting, dressed in expensive clothes, their faces glowing with excitement. They looked like they were preparing for a big event, and Maya felt a pang of jealousy. She wished she could be part of that world, the world where people didn't have to clean floors to survive. As she pushed her cleaning cart toward the door, she saw Richard again. He was standing near the exit, speaking to someone on the phone. He looked stressed, his jaw tight, as if the world weighed heavily on him. Maya didn't stop to look at him this time. She just kept walking. But as she reached the door, she couldn't help but glance over her shoulder. Richard was still there, standing tall and strong. He had everything: wealth, power, respect. And Maya had nothing. Or did she? The thought lingered in her mind as she stepped out of the building into the cool night air. Maya walked home, the weight of the day on her shoulders, but there was a fire inside her now. A small, quiet fire that refused to be extinguished. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't just a janitor. And one day, everyone would see that. The unexpected meeting. Maya arrived at work the next morning, determined to shake off the discomfort from the previous day. She wasn't going to let Richard's words affect her. She had learned over the years that people like him would always look down on people like her. But that didn't mean she had to care. Maya had a job to do, and that was all that mattered. As she stepped into the office building, she noticed a change in the atmosphere. The usual busy buzz of phones ringing and voices talking seemed a little quieter. The employees looked up from their desks, some whispering to each other in hushed tones. Maya paused for a moment, trying to figure out what was going on. She had never seen the office so still. "Hey, Maya," a voice called out from behind her. Maya turned to see Kyle, one of the younger office assistants. He was always friendly, often offering her a smile or a quick hello. "Is something happening today?" Maya asked, a little confused by the unusual quietness in the building. Kyle smiled nervously. "You haven't heard. Richard Steele is hosting an important meeting with some top investors today. It's a big deal. All the higher-ups are scrambling to get everything ready." Maya nodded, though she wasn't sure what that meant for her. She wasn't part of the meeting, and certainly wasn't invited to any of the fancy investor talks. But the thought of Richard being so busy made her feel a little more at ease. He wouldn't have time to bother her today. She went about her work, sweeping the floors and wiping down the surfaces. The building was big, and it took time to clean every corner. As she moved from one area to another, she found herself near the conference room where the meeting was taking place. The doors were slightly ajar, and she could hear the voices of important people inside, discussing business matters. She was just finishing up wiping the floors outside the conference room when she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Maya quickly ducked behind a corner, not wanting to interrupt the meeting or be in anyone's way. But as fate would have it, the footsteps didn't stop. Instead, they grew louder and closer. Maya froze. She looked up just in time to see Richard stepping out of the conference room. He was on the phone, his voice low and serious, and didn't notice her at first. Maya's heart raced. She didn't want him to see her. Not after yesterday. Not after the way he had spoken to her. But just as she turned to step away, Richard's sharp eyes caught sight of her. He looked up from his phone call and saw Maya standing there with her mop. For a moment, there was silence. Maya felt the weight of his gaze, and she held her breath. She was sure he would say something cruel again. Something like, "Get out of my way," or "Don't you have anything better to do?" Instead, Richard's expression softened for just a second. He lowered his phone and blinked. "Maya, right?" he asked, though he still didn't seem to recognize her fully. Maya nodded, surprised he remembered her name. "Yes, Mr. Steele," she replied quietly, hoping to avoid any more attention. Richard didn't say anything at first, just stood there looking at her, like he was trying to figure something out. Then, as if he had just remembered something, he spoke again, but this time his tone was different. "I need this place to look perfect for the meeting," he said, his voice less harsh, though still demanding. "Could you clean the hallway in front of the meeting room? We can't have it looking messy when the investors come in." Maya felt a flicker of surprise. She had never expected him to ask her for anything in such a calm way. Usually, people like Richard never noticed her, let alone ask for her help. But here he was, making a request. It wasn't a compliment, but it was a change from his usual attitude. Of course, Maya answered, trying not to show how surprised she was. She grabbed her mop and bucket and began cleaning the floor in front of the meeting room. As she worked, she couldn't help but notice Richard standing near the door, still talking on his phone. He was pacing, his conversation becoming more animated as he walked back and forth. For a moment, Maya wondered if he had any idea that she was still there, quietly working. Then, without warning, Richard stopped pacing and glanced at Maya again. This time, there was something different in his gaze. It was as if he was seeing her for the first time, not just a janitor, but a person. "Maya," he said, his voice quieter than before. "You know, I don't usually talk to the cleaning staff like this, but I wanted to say, I appreciate you doing your job so well. You work hard, and not everyone notices that." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know how to respond. Richard Steele, the CEO, the man who had belittled her the day before, was now complimenting her. She wasn't sure if he truly meant it, or if he was just trying to get her to do more work. But the words felt different this time. "Thank you, Mr. Steele," Maya finally said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I just do my job." Richard nodded, still watching her as she finished cleaning. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that Maya couldn't quite figure out. As the minutes passed, Maya felt the weight of the moment. She had just been acknowledged by someone powerful, someone who had treated her like she was invisible before. And for the first time, she realized something important. She might be invisible now, but she wasn't always going to be. She wasn't just a janitor. Maya was more than that. And maybe, just maybe, Richard Steele was starting to see that. The revelation. The next few days passed in a blur for Maya. The unexpected change in Richard's attitude lingered in her thoughts, but she tried not to get her hopes up. People like him didn't change overnight, and she wasn't about to let herself believe that he'd suddenly become kind. After all, she had seen his type before, rich, powerful, and dismissive of anyone they considered beneath them. But even as she swept the office floors and cleaned the windows, Maya couldn't help but notice the way Richard treated her now. Every time he walked by, he would nod or offer a quiet good morning, instead of ignoring her as he had done before. It wasn't much, but it was something. One afternoon, Maya was busy cleaning the lobby when she saw Richard step out of the elevator, his usual confident stride barely faltering. This time, however, he wasn't alone. A tall, sharp-dressed woman stood beside him, and they were deep in conversation. Richard didn't notice Maya at first, but the woman with him did. She smiled, a knowing smile that seemed to flicker between something familiar and something almost unsettling. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice light but firm. "Can you tell me where the bathroom is?" Maya blinked, caught off guard. She had no idea who this woman was, but there was something about her, something that made Maya feel a little uneasy. "It's down the hall to the left," she replied, trying to hide her uncertainty. The woman gave a polite nod and then glanced over her shoulder at Richard. "I'll be right back," she said, turning away to walk toward the bathroom. Maya continued her work, but the encounter didn't sit well with her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had seen that woman before, or at least someone very similar. The woman had looked at her with a strange expression, like she knew more than she was letting on. Maya couldn't explain it, but the encounter left her with a sense of foreboding. As the afternoon wore on, Maya's curiosity got the best of her. She found herself wandering over to the small break room, hoping to catch a quiet moment to clear her head. But when she entered, she froze. Richard and the woman from earlier were standing near the coffee machine, talking in low voices. Maya tried to turn around quietly, but it was too late. "Maya, right?" Richard's voice cut through the quiet, making her pause mid-step. She turned, not expecting him to notice her. "Yes, Mr. Steele." Richard's expression softened a little. "I was just introducing Sophie, a close family friend. She's in town for business, and I thought I'd show her around." Sophie smiled politely, her eyes scanning Maya with the same mysterious look she had given her earlier. "It's nice to meet you," Sophie said, her voice smooth and calm. Likewise, Maya replied, unsure of what else to say. Richard then glanced at Sophie, and in that brief moment, Maya saw something flicker in his eyes, something that made her wonder if there was more to the story than he was letting on. "We'll be heading to the conference room shortly," Richard said, his voice turning back to its usual businesslike tone. "I'll catch you later, Maya." Maya nodded and quickly excused herself. As she walked away, her mind raced with questions. Sophie. That name kept echoing in her thoughts. There was something about the way Richard had introduced her, the way she had looked at Maya. It felt like she was hiding something. But what? Later that evening, as Maya finished up her shift, she found herself unable to shake the feeling that something was about to change. She had been working at the office for years, but lately, the encounters with Richard, and now Sophie, felt different. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she knew one thing for sure. The world she had always known, the one where she was just a janitor, was starting to shift in ways she didn't understand. The next day, as Maya was cleaning the upper floor of the building, she overheard a conversation from a group of employees. They were talking about Richard's family, and one of them mentioned something that made Maya's heart stop. "You know, Richard's stepsister has been in town for a while now," one of the employees said, her voice full of gossip. "I heard they don't get along, though. It's always been a little tense between them." Maya's pulse quickened. Stepsister. Could it be? Could Sophie be Richard's stepsister? It seemed too unbelievable, but the pieces started to fall into place. Sophie had looked at her as if she knew her, and Richard's sudden interest in being nicer to Maya. It was all starting to make sense. Maya's thoughts were interrupted by a quiet voice calling her name. She turned to find Richard standing at the end of the hall, a serious expression on his face. "Maya," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "I need to speak with you. Can you come to my office?" Her heart skipped a beat. Was he going to reprimand her for something? Or was this about something else? The uncertainty gnawed at her as she followed Richard down the hall. But deep down, Maya had the strange feeling that the truth was about to come out. As she entered Richard's office, the door closed behind them, and for the first time, Maya felt like she was truly on the verge of something important. The truth unveiled. Maya stood still in Richard's office, her heart pounding as she waited for him to speak. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was the moment where everything might change. Would Richard finally open up about Sophie? Or was he about to dismiss her suspicions as nothing more than wild thoughts? Richard walked to his desk, his steps measured, but there was something in his demeanor that wasn't quite like usual. He wasn't angry or dismissive. Instead, there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, a look that Maya had never seen before. "Maya, please, have a seat," Richard said, motioning toward the chair across from his desk. She nodded and sat down slowly, trying to mask the rush of thoughts swirling in her mind. What was he going to say? What had he called her in here for? Maya could feel her palms growing clammy, but she forced herself to keep calm. Richard hesitated for a moment, his eyes on the papers scattered across his desk. He seemed lost in thought, as if deciding whether or not to say what had clearly been on his mind for a while. Finally, he let out a deep breath and turned his gaze back to her. "Maya," he began, his voice softer than usual, "there's something you should know, something I should have told you sooner." Maya's heart skipped a beat. This is it, she thought. This is where it all changes. "I know things have been different between us," Richard continued, his tone unusually sincere. "And I'm not going to pretend I didn't treat you badly at first. I was wrong, Maya. I've been wrong for a long time, and I want to make it right." Maya's brow furrowed, unsure of where this was going. What's he talking about? She had seen Richard act this way before, like he was trying to justify his actions, but there was something different in his voice now. Something that sounded genuine. "I've been keeping something from you," Richard said, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "The truth is, Sophie is not just a family friend. She's my stepsister. and she's been a part of my life for years. Maya's mind reeled. Stepsister. So Sophie was connected to Richard in a way she hadn't anticipated. But there was more to the story. Maya could sense it. Why hadn't he ever mentioned this before? Why had he kept Sophie a secret from everyone, including his employees? Richard saw the confusion in Maya's eyes and went on. I know this must be a shock to you. But the thing is, Sophie and we don't have the best relationship. It's complicated. Our parents got married when we were both older, and the years between us have created a lot of tension. She's not exactly the sisterly type, and we don't exactly keep in touch. Maya's mind buzzed with questions. What did this all mean? Why would Richard be telling her this now? I thought you should know the truth, Richard said, his voice steady but tinged with something deeper, regret, perhaps, or guilt. I didn't want you to feel like I was hiding anything from you. And I need to ask for your forgiveness. For the way I treated you in the past. I've been a jerk, Maya, and I'm sorry. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Maya wasn't sure how to respond. She had always known Richard to be arrogant, a man who felt entitled to whatever he wanted. She had never imagined him apologizing, especially not for his behavior towards her. But here he was, sitting in front of her, vulnerable in a way she never expected. Maya didn't know what to say at first. She had spent so much time resenting him for his behavior, but hearing him apologize, hearing him admit his wrongs, felt like a shock to her system. Was this a real change, or was it just another attempt to manipulate her? Before she could form a response, Richard continued, his eyes now fixed on her with an intensity she hadn't seen before. Maya, there's more to this than you know. Sophie's not just a stepsister. There's something she's hiding, something that affects both of us. Maya leaned forward, intrigued despite herself. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard glanced over his shoulder, as though checking if anyone was listening, before speaking in a low tone. Sophie, she's been trying to get her hands on something that belongs to me. She wants control of the company, and I'm afraid she might be using you to get it. Maya's heart sank as the weight of his words hit her. Was Sophie really trying to manipulate her? But why would she use Maya in her scheme? It didn't make sense. Richard saw the doubt in her eyes and leaned closer. I know this is a lot to take in, but I'm asking for your help, Maya. I need to know if Sophie is planning something. I don't trust her, and I need to know if she's been using you to get to me. The request hung in the air, heavy and urgent. Maya didn't know what to say. She had only just learned about Sophie's connection to Richard, and now she was being dragged into a family feud that she didn't understand. But one thing was clear. This was far from over. Maya was caught in the middle of a dangerous game, and the stakes were higher than she ever imagined. The dangerous game. Maya sat in Richard's office, her mind racing. The revelation that Sophie was his stepsister had shaken her, but now, with Richard's warning, things had escalated into something far more complicated. He was asking for her help, but was she ready to get involved in this family drama? Was it worth the risk? Richard leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her face. He seemed desperate, as though he knew that Maya's decision in this moment would change everything. Maya, Richard said, breaking the silence. I know this is a lot to process, but I need to know if Sophie's been using you. I can't trust her anymore. She's dangerous, and if she's got a plan to take over the company, we have to stop her. Maya's heart raced. Sophie's words from the previous day echoed in her mind. You'll regret crossing me, Maya. Trust me, I know how to get what I want. Had those words meant something more than she had first believed? Was Sophie really playing a game with them all? I don't know, Maya replied, her voice shaky. I don't even know what Sophie wants from me. I don't think she's trying to control anything. She's just been. She paused, thinking carefully. She's just been weird. Richard's eyes darkened. She's been using you, Maya. She's been working behind the scenes, trying to get close to you. She knows that you're important to me now. She's always been jealous of anyone who could get close to me. It's not just about the company anymore. It's about power. Sophie wants everything." Maya felt a chill run through her. The idea of Sophie, who had always seemed so polished and perfect, being a manipulative force was something she couldn't quite wrap her head around. But Richard's words made sense. Sophie had never been friendly toward her, and the sudden closeness she tried to build with Maya over the past few weeks felt strange. Could it all have been a plan to manipulate her? To use her to get closer to Richard and his company? "I don't know if I can do this, Richard," Maya said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can be a part of this mess." Richard stood up, pacing around his office. He seemed restless, his usual confidence replaced by urgency. "I understand if you're scared. This isn't easy. But you have to understand, I can't do this alone. Sophie will use anyone she can to get what she wants. She's ruthless." Maya bit her lip. She had always prided herself on staying out of office drama, keeping her head down and focusing on her work. But now, she was in the middle of something far bigger than herself. Richard's desperation was palpable, and though part of her wanted to walk away, another part felt a sense of responsibility. He was asking for her help, and despite everything that had happened, she couldn't just turn her back on him now. "I'll help you," Maya finally said, her voice steady. "But only because you've been honest with me. I don't want to get involved in any more games, Richard. I need to know that you trust me." Richard stopped pacing and looked at her, his expression softening. "I do trust you, Maya. I wouldn't ask you for help if I didn't. But we have to act fast. Sophie's got her eyes on something, and we need to figure out what it is before she makes her move." Maya nodded slowly. "What do we do now?" Richard's eyes sharpened with determination. "We need to find out where Sophie's been. We need to gather information about her plans, and we need to watch her every move. I know she's been keeping secrets from me. She always has." Maya felt a knot tighten in her stomach, watching Sophie, following her. It didn't sound safe, but Richard was right about one thing. Sophie had been acting strange, and Maya had felt it too. She had to do something. Richard leaned forward, his voice low and serious. "Maya, you're the only one I trust to help me with this. If you're in, we'll work together. But if you're not, I'll understand." Maya took a deep breath. She had been thrown into this situation, and there was no turning back now. But what she didn't realize yet was how much more dangerous it was going to get. Sophie wasn't just playing games. She was prepared for a battle, and Maya was about to be dragged into it. "I'm in," Maya said, her resolve hardening. "But we need to be careful. Sophie won't give up easily." Richard smiled, but there was little warmth in it. "That's exactly why we have to stay one step ahead of her." As Maya left Richard's office, the weight of the decision pressed heavily on her. She was no longer just an employee in the background. She was now part of something much bigger than herself. Sophie's game had just become Maya's game too, and she wasn't sure who would come out on top. The unveiling. Maya's heart raced as she sat in her small apartment, staring at the stack of papers in front of her. The documents Richard had given her weren't just ordinary files. They contained details about the company, Sophie's personal connections, and a trail of shady business deals that Sophie had been involved in. Maya hadn't expected to uncover so much, but the deeper she dug, the more secrets she found. As she sifted through the documents, one name kept appearing. A business partner, someone Richard had trusted implicitly, someone Sophie had been in contact with for months. The same partner whose business dealings seemed suspiciously linked to some of Sophie's recent actions. Was this part of her plan to take over Richard's company? Maya's mind buzzed with possibilities. Could Sophie be trying to undermine Richard's position within the company to take control for herself? Maya had always known Sophie was ambitious, but this was something else entirely. The doorbell rang, snapping Maya out of her thoughts. She quickly shoved the papers into a drawer and rushed to answer the door, unsure who could be visiting her at this hour. Standing on her doorstep was none other than Richard himself, looking unusually tense. "Richard, what are you doing here?" Maya asked, surprised. "I need to talk to you," Richard said, stepping inside without waiting for her invitation. "It's urgent." Maya led him into the living room, where they both sat. She could sense the weight of the situation in the air. Richard was usually calm and composed, but tonight he seemed on edge, his eyes darting around as if expecting someone to burst through the door. "What's going on?" Maya asked, her voice filled with concern. "I've been following Sophie," Richard confessed, leaning forward. "She's been meeting with the business partner I told you about. But it's worse than I thought. I think she's planning to launch a takeover. She's been working with him behind my back, and I don't know what she's promised him. But it's clear she's trying to get control of the company." Maya's eyes widened. She had suspected something like this, but hearing Richard's confirmation made it all the more real. Sophie wasn't just after revenge. She was after power. "But why would she want to destroy everything you've built?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because she feels entitled," Richard said bitterly. "Sophie has always believed she's meant to run everything. She's never been happy with playing second fiddle. But what she doesn't realize is that if she goes through with this, it'll ruin the company and everyone who's worked so hard to make it successful." Maya's thoughts raced. She had to help Richard, but how could she? Sophie was clever, manipulative, and ruthless. This wasn't just about family drama anymore. It was about business and power, and Maya felt as if she was caught in the middle of a dangerous game. "We need to stop her," Maya said firmly, her determination growing. "But we can't just confront her. She's too dangerous for that." Richard looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I knew I could count on you, Maya. But this is bigger than just us. Sophie's made powerful connections, and she's willing to do anything to get what she wants. We need a plan." Maya took a deep breath, glancing at the drawer where she'd hidden the documents. She knew that information was crucial to stopping Sophie's plot. "I've been looking through some of Sophie's records," she said slowly. "I think I found something that might give us an advantage. We can use this information to expose her." Richard's eyes widened. "What did you find?" Maya hesitated for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "Sophie's been in contact with a business partner of yours, someone you trust. I think they're planning to use your company's assets to fund a hostile takeover. They've been making moves behind your back for months." Richard's face darkened. "I knew something wasn't right with him. But this is worse than I imagined. We need to expose Sophie and her accomplice before they make their next move." Maya nodded, feeling the weight of the situation settle over her. "We can't let her get away with this. We need to act fast, or we might lose everything." Richard stood up, his face determined. "Then let's get to work. We've got a lot to do." Maya watched him leave, her mind racing. The stakes were higher than ever. Sophie was playing a dangerous game, and Maya had to be prepared for whatever came next. As much as she wanted to stay out of the drama, she knew she couldn't. Not now. Not when so much was at risk. The game had officially begun, and Sophie, Richard, and Maya were all players in a game none of them could afford to lose. The final confrontation. The next morning, Maya couldn't shake the weight of the events that had unfolded, the documents she had found, Sophie's betrayal, and Richard's determination. It all weighed on her mind. She sat in her small apartment, staring out of the window, her thoughts consumed by the storm brewing around them. Richard had promised that they would stop Sophie, but Maya wasn't sure what that would mean for all of them in the end. She had known Sophie for years, long before the tensions between them had grown. She had seen the ambition in Sophie's eyes, the hunger for success and power that had always driven her. But now, as Maya prepared to confront her, it wasn't just about ambition. It was about something darker, something dangerous. Maya's phone rang, cutting through her thoughts. It was Richard. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Maya stood up, taking a deep breath. "Ready as I'll ever be." "Meet me at the office," We need to confront Sophie together. This ends today." Maya hung up the phone, grabbing her purse and heading out the door. The drive to the office felt longer than usual, her heart pounding with each passing minute. What would Sophie do when she found out her plan had been exposed? Would she retaliate? And what about Richard? Would he be ready for the fallout? When Maya arrived at the office, she was met by Richard, who was already waiting in the lobby. His face was set in a grim expression, his jaw clenched. They exchanged a few words, but there was no time for pleasantries. They needed to act quickly. "Are you sure about this?" Maya asked as they walked toward the elevator. "Once we confront Sophie, there's no going back." Richard nodded. "I know, but she's crossed the line. We can't let her destroy everything." The elevator doors slid open, and they stepped inside. As the elevator ascended, Maya's mind raced. She wasn't sure what Sophie would do, but she had a feeling that the confrontation wouldn't go the way they expected. Sophie was unpredictable, and when pushed into a corner, she could be dangerous. When the elevator doors opened, they stepped into the office floor, and Maya's eyes immediately found Sophie's desk. Sophie was there, sitting confidently, as if nothing had changed. She looked up when they approached, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Richard," she said, her voice cool. "Maya, I'm surprised to see you both. I thought we were past all the drama." Richard didn't waste time. "Cut the act. Sophie, we know what you've been up to. We know about the business partner, the takeover plans. You've been using me, and you've been using the company for your own gain." Sophie's smile didn't falter. "I'm not sure what you're talking about. I'm simply doing what needs to be done for the future of this company." Maya could see the mask Sophie was wearing. She was trying to play innocent, but there was no hiding the truth anymore. "You've been plotting behind Richard's back," Maya said, her voice steady. "And now, the truth is out. Your plans are exposed. Sophie, it's over." Sophie stood up, her eyes flashing with anger. "You think you can just take me down that easily? You have no idea what I'm capable of." Richard took a step forward, his expression hardening. "We've already seen what you're capable of, and it's not going to work anymore. You're done." For a moment, the room was silent. Maya could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the confrontation settling over them. Sophie stared at them, her face unreadable. Then, slowly, she sat back down, a twisted smile curling on her lips. "You really think you've won?" Sophie asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're too naive. You have no idea what's coming." Richard and Maya exchanged a glance, both of them understanding the danger in her words. Sophie wasn't backing down. In fact, this was just the beginning. "We don't need to play games with you anymore," Richard said, his voice cold. "This ends today. We're exposing everything. Your deal with the business partner, the secret meetings, everything. You won't get away with this." Sophie's smile faded, replaced by a look of fury. "You think you've won. You haven't. You'll regret this." The room grew heavy with the tension between them. Maya could see Sophie's mind working, calculating her next move. The battle for control had only just begun, and it was clear that Sophie would not let go of her ambitions so easily. Richard turned to Maya, his expression grim. "We need to make sure this gets out. We can't let her pull any more strings." Maya nodded. "I'll take care of it." With that, Richard and Maya turned to leave. As they exited the office, the weight of the situation hit them both. They had confronted Sophie, exposed her plans, and yet they both knew this was far from over. Sophie was dangerous, and her ambition was unstoppable. But for now, at least, they had won this round. As Maya walked out of the building, she couldn't help but feel the tension still hanging in the air. Sophie wouldn't give up that easily, and Maya knew that the war for control was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a fighting chance. The game had just begun. And now Sophie knew that Richard and Maya weren't going to let her win without a fight.